Okay, when last we left off, we were talking about um, plans for sustainable living in order to maximize um, the amount of resources available for future generations. And one of the recommendations that we saw in the flow chart last time we were together was to protect and restore the Earth's resources. One example of the Earth's resources are forests, and an unsustainable practice is unsustainable logging and burning, making them a non-renewable resource. And this is just a matter of um, depleting this particular resource faster than it regenerates. And we discussed the fact that in many parts of the world this is a common practice, but a lot of major lumber concerns, particularly Weyerhaeuser here in the United States, um, makes a judicious effort to replant the trees that they cut down in order to keep the flow of this natural resource constant and consistent so that they can continue to produce products and continue to improve our standard of living. Biodiversity is another important resource that we need to protect. Biodiversity refers to the number and variety of organisms on the planet, and the reason that this is vital to improving the lives of man is that it provides economic services in the form of food, medicine, energy, building, and clothing materials. So there's raw materials there. There's also a lot of fertile ground for discovery, science, and applied science in extremely diverse ecosystems. For instance, many breakthrough medicines have been found in as a result of research done in extremely biodiverse ecosystems. A lot of drugs have been generated that actually mimic the action of compounds that have been isolated from um, insects, plants, and other organisms that we find in diverse areas such as the tropical rainforest. There are also ecosystem services provided by these resources, and these include protection of watersheds, agricultural lands, the maintenance of climate, and the maintenance of habitat. And if we deplete or change these, what the potential is that we can shift the ecosystem again to being something that does not adequately serve human needs. And remember that we discussed the fact that it's not as if there wouldn't be an ecosystem after unsustainable practices. It just might not be something that necessarily serves the purposes of mankind. Okay, the next aspect in the overall plan of sustainable living was to provide adequate food for all people. Food insecurity is one of the biggest concerns in many parts of the country. People lack access to food and need to live healthy, productive lives, and many people live in chronic hunger and suffer from malnutrition. There are about 800 million people worldwide, with many children, many of these being children. Most of these individuals live in rural areas in developing countries, and it's difficult for them often to have a reliable source of nutrition. Improving agriculture sort of goes hand in hand with providing adequate food for all people. This is the highest priority for global sustainability. And if you remember the first lecture where we discussed those fantastic facts about corn production in the United States as well as cotton production, you can see that one of the tenets of this overall plan has almost been realized, which is to produce more food, more agricultural products using less land and using that land more efficiently. The fact that it continues to jump out at me from all the ones we discussed is that the United States is responsible for producing 40% of the entire world's corn, which is a spectacular feat and wasn't possible as recently as 20 years ago. Here we see a portrait of a Yanomami father and his son in Brazil. These are Brazil's last Stone Age tribe. So these are very primitive peoples. Intrusion into isolated areas such as the Amazon basin threatens both biological diversity as well as the culture of these indigenous people who have lived in harmony with nature for hundreds and hundreds of generations. And so again, what we see here is change brought about by the hand of man, which could potentially adversely affect these individuals' lifestyles. Okay, next tenet of the overall plan for sustainable living is improved agriculture. We need to increase productivity using the same amount of land. In the last 50 years, production has kept up with population growth, but there have been environmental costs. Remember that we discussed the famous wager that the author of The Population Bomb, Paul Ehrlich, made with leading economists at the time, where he predicted that within 30 years there would be worldwide starvation and the prices of precious metals would skyrocket. And none of these predictions came to pass, and in large part because of the increase in technology and the efficiency with which we're able to meet the needs for the world's growing population through improved agricultural efficiency. We need to increase productivity using the same amount of land. One of the ways that we can do this is through multi-cropping, which is to use the land in all seasons, and also conservation tillage, which is a practice designed to keep the fertile topsoil in place so that there's enough nutrients in the soil in order to produce agricultural products to meet the world's needs. And here we can see an example of an unsustainable practice. This is erosion. This is in Kenya. This is a serious form of soil degradation. Careful stewardship of the land can prevent this type of damage. Once you lose the fertile topsoil, it's very difficult to grow crops in these nutrient deficient areas of the world, and as a result, productivity goes down. The final aspect of the plan was to mitigate climate change, and the main thrust here is to try and reduce man's role in the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect holds that additional warming is produced by increased level of gases that absorb infrared radiation. Stabilizing the climate on the part of man requires a comprehensive energy plan, which would include phasing out fossil fuels, increasing energy conservation, and improving energy efficiency. And remember that we discussed the fact that many aspects of this particular ecological issue are controversial. One of the aspects of anthropomorphic climate change, man-made climate change, that isn't addressed in many studies is the fact that other factors aside from man's role in the ecosystem can affect the climate, among those being effects that come primarily from the sun and from changing conditions in our own solar system. We discussed also the fact that the sun alone has at least 1,000 different patterns of energy production that have been cataloged as a result of efforts by NASA, and have also found evidence in the fossil record of periodic changes in the sun's output of UV radiation and IR radiation, which has adversely affected the climate on the planet Earth long before man was using fossil fuels. So we've been alternately an ice ball and a desert several times before man's industrial age ever came into being. So again, a balanced approach here can sometimes mitigate the policies that we seek to promote. And this is just a flow chart showing you the overall plan for sustainable living. You can find this in Chapter 2, and what we're doing here is basically diagramming this idea of anthropomorphic climate change, the idea that increased CO2 may adversely affect the Earth's climate by elevating the temperature, and then we see all of the possible outcomes from this. We see acidification of the oceans, we see changes in plant growth, changes in community composition, basically changes in both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. And again, it's not to say that there would be no ecosystem if these predictions were to come to the fore. It's just that these ecosystems may not improve the standard of living of mankind at large on the planet. Okay, the fifth recommendation was designing sustainable cities. A couple of subtopics here are urban transportation. Remember that 50% of the world's people live in cities. There was only 3% of the world's population that could be cataloged as urban in 1800, and now in the U.S. 80% live in cities. Urban transportation is designed to build the city around the people as opposed to the ownership of individual vehicles such as automobiles. This can produce less congestion and decrease the amount of pollution, and also free up space for parking. Water resources are also a consideration. We should recycle wastewater for other uses. Other than being potable, being drinkable, it can be used for tasks such as watering the lawn or the garden. Water purification of sewage is also a recommendation prior to release into the sewage system at large in order to cut down on potential contamination in the ecosystem at large. And here's just a picture of Manila in the Philippines. You can see here that we have in this single photograph a record of the gap between the rich and the poor. And here you can see these squatter settlements in the shadow of these giant skyscrapers. And what you have in this particular developing nation is what we would catalog as a permanent underclass due to the lack of economic opportunity and the inability of these individuals to find viable work, to earn a living and improve their standard of living. They're often locked within this socioeconomic strata, and as a result they create now a problem for this urban population at large. They're unable to meet their needs, and they often abuse natural resources just for the sake of survival. So now we get to the concept checks, the final concept checks for this chapter. First question is, what is the global extent of poverty? Poverty leads to tens of thousands of infant and childhood deaths worldwide. It's correlated with illiteracy, starvation, and the lack of rights for women and children. It threatens the global ecosystem that sustains us. Failing to confront poverty around the world makes it impossible to attain global sustainability. And again, we discussed extensively last time we were together that there are many schools of thought on how to deal with poverty. There's a large body of thought that believes that the solution to poverty is simply a transfer of wealth without the requisite education in order to provide these individuals with a sustainable way of lifting themselves out of their socioeconomic status, whereas there are other schools of thought that believe that by creating economic opportunity through job creation, which is fostered in such systems as capitalism, you provide a method for the poor to improve their standard of living through making a livable wage, through maintaining or increasing their education in order for them to continue to acquire skills that will allow them a better job and a larger paycheck, and as that occurs, they're able to move out of an underclass. What are two ecosystem services provided by natural resources such as forests and biological diversity? Well, forests and biological diversity provide ecosystem services such as protection of watersheds and soils and the maintenance of habitats for animals and plants. Next question, what is food insecurity? It's the condition in which people live with chronic hunger and malnutrition. Next question, how is stabilizing climate related to energy use? Stabilizing climate requires a comprehensive energy plan, including the phasing out of fossil fuels in favor of renewable energy, increasing energy conservation, and improving energy efficiency. And again, we've discussed extensively in class that there are many sides to this issue and how to best deal with it. What are two serious problems in urban environments? Well, these are water scarcity and effectively dealing with squatter settlements. Effective transportation systems are also a goal of many city planners, and this can alleviate some of these problems. Okay, we end this chapter looking at a case study. This is the lowest plateau in mainland China. It's an important resource for that country. It has fertile agricultural soil. It's easily eroded by wind and water when no vegetation holds it in place. So what happens is that we lose the fertile topsoil and we have an inability to produce plant products that will help sustain the population as well as promote effective animal husbandry. We turned it into a desert by deforestation and overgrazing. So in order to recover this, in '94, the watershed rehabilitation project for this plateau was initiated. It involved a program of reforestation along with education about the causes of degradation and recovery of the land and the silting of the Yellow River, which carves out a large portion of this valley. And the result has been a rebound in the biodiversity in this region, and ultimately one day perhaps it can be used responsibly in order to meet the agricultural needs of the peoples in this region. Okay, I will see everybody in class, and have a wonderful weekend.